Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
We haven't had this since towards the end of Zoom, where there are more COVID. There are more people on Zoom than there are in person. Right. So hello, Zoomers. I want to reintroduce some of you to my dear friend and now colleague, Rabbi Benna Kane-Graber, who's on the screen. She was a member of my community for 9 years in Monroe. She was one of the original students in this Rashi class in the year 2000, a long time ago. And then about a decade ago, she decided it was time to take her Torah studies and make it more official. And last week, she was ordained as a rabbi at the AJR in New York. And
that's where you spoke.
That's where I spoke. That's where I presented her as an ordainee, and it's just delightful to when a congregant and a student becomes a colleague. It's a tremendous thrill. So Rabbi Kane-Graber, Brucha Haba'ah, Kvod Harav. So great to have you. Okay, and. We are really at the very end of Parshat Va'era, and I say really at the very end because Rashi has one very long comment on verse 31, and that's his last comment on the Parsha. So we have like four more verses, but we really have, if I'm understanding where we are correctly, one long Rashi to do. And so we may or may not, he has a comment on 31 and 32, but it's all on the same topic, trying to figure out these inscrutable words, scrutable two psukim that get us right up to the maftir of the end of Va'era. Last week, I know it was frustrating for some because we didn't have the audio set up, so it was only me talking. This time we have the audio, so people will be able to participate. Although we only have one extra microphone. Let me see if I can get Hector. Well, we probably don't need two for this room.
Rabbi, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm being very serious. Since we're at the end of a maftir, would that be appropriate for a siyum?
Well, when we get to we're not going to finish Va'era today, but yes, when we finish Va'era, absolutely. Oh, you mean in terms of like the Siyum B'chorot?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. If you finish studying a parsha with Rashi, does that qualify? I think technically la halacha, I'm not sure. Would I be okay with it? Maybe, but no worries because we've already also studied a Masechet Mishnah and we'll be finishing that for the Siyum B'chorot.
Okay.
So it's an interesting question. There's a tshuva by Rabbi David Galinkin about the amount of study and the type of study that qualifies for a true halachic siyum, and what he concludes is that the minimum amount of study, that is one tractate, one masechet of Mishnah or Tosefta. Some people are more stringent and they actually require a trier tractate of Talmud, which is a lot more learning. There are definitely people who do siyumim when they finish a book of the Bible that they've been studying or a parsha, and that is a worthy of celebration. It's a question as to whether or not it counts as a halachic siyum that would obviate someone who is otherwise obligated to fast from fasting. Good?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let me read verse 31 because that's what we left off with last time, and we hadn't read the Rashi. And if you were not here last week, even if you were, we have this couplet of verses 31 and 32 that are written differently than the previous verses and the coming verses. They seem half narrative, half kind of agricultural scene setting. We can find a way, and Rashi will find a way to weave them mellifluously into the text. But because we've become so sensitive to the text, these are verses that say Ze Omer Darsheni. This demands an inquiry because it just doesn't seem like it fits. Pharaoh and Moses and Aaron and plagues, and all of a sudden you have almost a 2-verse poem, a rhapsody on the certain agricultural situation in which the barad, the hail, hit and was removed. Okay, so verse 31, V'hapishta, the flax, V'hasaora, the barley, nu kata, which we understood when we read the pshat last week to mean we're smitten, but there's a question of, even though we understand it as being we're smitten, is it from the verb lehakot, the word makah, right, like a plague, or is the nun part of the root? Rashi's going to help us with that. But the meaning is they got shmeisted. So all of the flax and the barley that was in the field, they got damaged. Why? Ki. Here the ki means because. Ki doesn't always mean because in biblical Hebrew. It does mean because here. Ki hasora aviv, right? It's very hard to translate that unless you know really, really good biblical Hebrew, because otherwise you'd be saying because the barley is spring, because the word aviv we understand as meaning spring, but we discussed a little bit last week. Why does aviv mean spring, right? The reason why aviv means spring, it's not translated as spring, it just denotes spring, right? And the reason why aviv means spring is because aviv is an agricultural term, probably related to a root we're going to look at, having to do with new growth and new sturdy growth. So if we read aviv as sturdy growth, then the question is, what does the because mean? That the flax and the barley were indeed damaged because the barley was strong? Initially, that seems counterintuitive. V'hapishta givol, and the flax was already bud. You already could see like buds in the plant. So walk me through the logic, assuming I'm translating it correctly. What's the logic of the because? Because the barley was strong, and because the flax already had buds in it, they indeed were broken or damaged, as opposed to other things. Let's give you a mic. I'm going to keep my microphone here. Let's pass it around.
Because it had already begun to bear fruit, because the thing that was going to be produced by the plant was already there, at least in initial growth. Therefore, it could be destroyed and would not ever grow to
Very
fullness.
good. So what seems initially counterintuitive is actually very intuitive, right? I don't know. Think of soft swaying grass. Is hail going to do much to it? No. But once it's begun to stiffen, or the thing that's growing appears, then all of a sudden something hard hitting it, right? Like a meadow is not going to be damaged by hail, but strawberry plants that have fruit in them will be, right? So that seems to be the basic logic of the verse, if we're understanding the words correctly, and that is a very big if, because it is inscrutable. Larry, Diane?
Well, the other thing is, I think if a plant hasn't begun to bear fruit, it could be somewhat compromised, but then regrow. In other words, if you hit a field with rain at the wrong time, like the grape harvest, for example, then you don't get any new growth after that. So if it's already growing, as Tova said, if it's already growing the fruit, there's no chance that it's going to recover and grow. If you get it earlier, probably it could.
That's a great comment, right? So again, it reverses what our intuition might be. At some level, you might think the more robust the plant is, the more sturdy it is, but it's actually more vulnerable because it's already gone through its birthing process of the year. It's not going to happen again. Great, right? So that may indeed be the pshat. I want to read verse 32 just because Rashi kind of understands these verses together. But since I'm not the only one who can read right now, let's have Carol read. Let's give Carol the great challenge of reading a very hard to translate verse.
V'hachita v'hakusemet lo nuku ki afilot hena. I have no idea. I can start with the wheat.
Okay,
right?
so we got wheat. Kusema, anyone know? It's actually a very appropriate noun for this week because it is spelt, right? It's one of the grains listed in the Mishnah that both can make kosher matzah and can make chametz. It's interesting to be reminded that if you've forgotten, it's only the grains that are, when they become chametzified, are counted as chametz, that you can use to make kosher matzah, right? So, if you made matzah out of quinoa, it would be kosher for Pesach, but it wouldn't be kosher matzah because quinoa isn't chametz, right? So kusem is one of them. It's spelt, and there is spelt matzah out there. I wonder, is spelt one of the? Does it not have gluten or something? Is that why they make spelt matzah? Yeah. So I think it's one of the gluten-free options for matzah.
It's not.
Okay.
Sorry,
So
it's not gluten-free. Spelt is not gluten-free. And
it's not gluten-free. Okay.
no, most matzah for people who are really gluten-free is made from oats, but it's only made from oats that have been washed in the field so that there's no cross-contamination with wheat.
Got it. Right. The gluten. Now that I remember, the most gluten-free matzah is like made from tapioca or potato starch, and it's delicious, but it's awful for you. Okay, so it's not really matzah. You can't.
Matzah is.
Right. You can't be yotzei. You can't fulfill your obligation on matzah on the standard gluten-free matzah. Okay. So you have wheat. You have spelt. Lo nuku. Whatever lo nuku means, it seems to be the negative passive of what nukata was in the previous verse, right? So nukata we understood to mean we're damaged. We're not clear yet. Rashi will help us to figure out why it means damage, what's the root. But whatever nukata means in the positive, lo nuku, in what we call the pu'al form, the simplest passive voice, they were not maybe damaged. And now we have another because, right? So the because up there suggested, why were they damaged? Because they were strong enough to be damaged, and they were full enough, they'd already sprouted, and therefore that ended the season. But for some reason, the wheat and the spelt were not, ki afilot, because they were afil or afila. Any thoughts? I don't have any thoughts. Meaning, I know I have no association with this word whatsoever except for this verse.
I mean, it's not from Nafal.
Well, most people don't read it as nafal because when the nun falls out from a root, it doesn't get replaced with an aleph, right? Alephs at the beginning of roots usually are core to the root, right? But let's use logic. If we understand the previous verse correctly as to why those things were damaged, what could, just in the realm of meaning, afilot mean, even if you know the root, what could it mean such that it explains why the wheat and the spelt were not damaged? Okay, so Tova said they were immature, right? They were new enough that they were somehow less vulnerable. Joanna?
In another Passover connection, could we understand afilat here the way we understand afilu, as in afilu pa'amachat in the four questions? Not even. They were not even ripe yet. They were not even ready yet.
That's really fascinating. I've never thought of that because I think of the word afilu as whatever form of speech it is. I don't know what form of speech the word even is. Is it an adverb? I think of it as a word that stands by itself, that doesn't have a shoresh, that doesn't get declined, it doesn't get conjugated, it just is. It would be very interesting to wonder if the word afilu is connected to this afilot. I looked up, there are 15 tabs open on my screen that we're going to look at, but the one that I did not look at was afilot for BD on the BDB. I don't know why, but let's actually hold on to it because I want to look at Rashi's. Well, now let's look and see what BDB says about afilot. Hold on. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so let me just move this down so I can see better. So afel, like afela, means like darkness disappearing, like the setting of the sun. It might take me too long to figure out because he doesn't have an actual entry for afil here. Afil, darkened, concealed, late of crops, afilot, and he gives our verse of wheat and spelt. So either immature, as Tova was saying, or late, which goes to what Diane was saying. They were late enough that they were not yet in their vulnerable fruit-producing stage, such that, all right, so they were hit by hail. They were not supposed to bloom until 3 weeks from now. They're fine, okay? Something had to do with lateness. Let's see if he says anything else on that entry. No, that's it. So he doesn't connect it to afilu in any way. Doesn't mean that it's not a good read. Doesn't connect it that way. Marshall, and then I see Rachel.
The word afilut also reminds me of the word afela, which means pitch darkness. And we're going to be having the plague coming up of choshech.
Yes. So you're saying just kind of, it's kind of like an interesting coincidence, or do you think there's a verbal connection?
I think it's a sort of verbal connection there.
Let's leave it as it could be. It could be. Afela, I can't remember if the word afela is actually going to appear in the Hebrew in the darkness plague. Oops, what's going on here? Oh, no. I'm now hearing an echo. Okay, sorry about that. I opened up the wrong thing on my computer. Okay. Anything else just on the verse itself before we dive into the Rashi? Oh, Rachel, yes. Rachel and then Alan. Rachel, take a microphone.
I wanted to actually see if you could look up, Rabbi, a diagram of flax and barley. What do they look like when they're mature? Because the idea barley was in ear is my translation.
Right.
My understanding of barley is that it's like wheat, not like corn, and that the plant has seeds at the tip. And in both these cases, in the case of barley and flax and spelt and wheat, the part that we're interested in is the seed at the tip, because that's what we grind up to make chametz and matzah. But I was thinking maybe that would enlighten us as to why one group got wrecked by hail and the other group didn't.
Yeah, if we spend, Alan has his hand up, and then I want to compare some translations.
Just a reference between the difference between nukata and nuku, and trying to determine what it means. We had discussions last week whether it was from lahakot to hit, or neche for being an invalid, and yet it seems that it would make appropriate that it would be to hit from lahakot, because you've got that nuku. It seems that would be consistent with what's going on, also with being hit and smashed, or whatever it's going to be in that way.
Right. Well, I think the fact that nukat appears and nuku appears is not a machriya, is not a determinant as to whether the verb is haka or nache, because both of them could be either, right? And both meanings work. And we'll see what Rashi says about that.
Okay.
Okay, let's look at some translations. I want to share with you Everett Fox's translation. And again, this is really hard to do just word for word. So Everett Fox, now the flax, this is the previous verse, and the barley were stricken. I think when he translates it as stricken, he is weighing in on the sign of neche as opposed to hika, but I could be wrong, because stricken itself is ambiguous. Stricken could mean you're reduced, that's neche, or it could be you're stricken because you were hit. So maybe I'm wrong, but that's just how my ear hears it. For the barley was in ears, right? And I think he's going to like the second level of the word aviv and not maybe the first or level. The second level, I mean, the way the Bible uses the word aviv refers to ears of grain, right? The question is, why does aviv mean that? And the flax was in buds, but the wheat and the spelt were not stricken, for they are late ripening. So he turns the word afila as to one word, late ripening, right? Less mature. If we look at some of the other translations, JPS. Now the flax and the barley were ruined, nukata, for the barley was in the ear and the flax was in the bud, but the wheat and the emmer, I guess emmer is another word for spelt, what's the note here say? A kind of wheat, were not hurt, for they ripen late. So direct translation of afila as late. Koren. And the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was in the bud, but the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they were late ripening. Okay, it's another vote for late. And I want to show you Charles Kahana. Now the flax and the barley were ruined, for the barley had ripened. That goes to, who said that? That was Diana said that, right? That since they'd already ripened, that's why they were ruined. Had they not yet ripened, then they would have still had a chance to ripen. And the flax was in the stalk, but the wheat and the spelt were not ruined, for they were still in the ground and unseen. What word is he playing with when he says still in the ground and unseen? Afela, darkness, right? They were still hidden. I'm not sure that's pshat in what the word means, but it's a great read, right? That's what Marshall maybe was playing at, that afilot, they were still shrouded, right? Shrouded in the fact that they hadn't yet burst forth. It's very creative, okay? Larry, any translations that are worthy to share with us in front of you?
No. You want just translations on verse 31?
Yeah, I mean, do Alter or Kaplan say anything that's worth lingering on before we look at Rashi?
Alter doesn't, and Kaplan, I'm sorry, except that Kaplan uses the word ripe. Barley was ripe, so that supports Barney. And the flax had formed stalks, is the way to put that. Wheat and spelt, since they are late in sprouting, so nothing.
Late in sprouting. That's the afilot, late in sprouting. Okay, Renee, and then Rosemary.
Saperstein says the flax and barley were smashed, for the barley was nearly ripe, and the flax was in its stalk, and the wheat and spelt were not smashed, for they are late ripening.
So early and late, playing on that. Nearly ripening is interesting.
Did you see, by the way, in Saperstein, when he, in that verse that you read, it said now the flax sentence, there was an editorial comment to explain how much harm was done.
Is it worth reading?
No, that's what it says. That's the editorial comment of now the flax was
it's
to
explaining
explain how much harm was done.
I see. Got it. Let's give Rosemary the microphone.
I'm not sure for the barley. If I know the word aviv, you said it's spring. Does it also mean it was a springtime or not?
Well, you're asking what season it was in? Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it was spring because our understanding of Pesach is spring. The one of the nicknames of Pesach is Chag HaAviv, right? And we're getting close to Exodus night. It's called Chag HaAviv because of when it occurred in the season. And because it's called Chag HaAviv, that's in some ways the primary reason why we have an intercalated calendar, because we have to mess with the lunar calendar to make sure that the 15th day of Nisan never falls before the vernal equinox, because spring is a technical term, right? It's the only, really one of the only things in our religious tradition that is governed by the sun, that Pesach night has to happen after the vernal equinox. And that's why as soon as we lose enough days in the lunar calendar, right, you lose about 11 a year. If you multiply 11 times 3, that's 33. That's more than a month. You're going to fall behind. However late Pesach once was, after 3 full years, you're going to fall behind. Therefore, you add in the month. So we imagine that certainly the Exodus night happened in spring. We've talked for a year now as to not having a sense of how much time is passing between these plagues. Is this a day, right? Was this happening over years? So we may or may not already be in the actual season in which the Exodus took place according to the Torah. But when we think about that time of year, yes, it's Aviv.
So if it is that way, most of the villages I have worked with places to crop, it's done, the wheat is done in late autumn. So I don't know about barley, because barley normally in Middle East they give to horses and donkeys to eat because it gives them power, strength. So I don't know the time, but I know the time of wheat, it's always late autumn.
Yeah.
So at that time, if it is late autumn, in the spring, they are really still not grown. Maybe they are underground or they have just little heads up which nothing will happen if the
And from where else in our tradition are we aware that barley is early ripening?
root Shavuot.
Root Shavuot, right? The whole point of linking the Omer period and Shavuot to the giving of the Torah is that this was the earliest ripening grain. That's why Shavuot is Chag HaBikurim, the festival of the first fruits. The whole ritual that we read, my father was a wandering Aramean from Parshat Ki Tavo, is the ritual that the Israelites would say when they brought their first ripening grains to the temple to say thank you. Yes, we're going to have a good season. That was barley, right? It was not, it's not built around the flax, but apparently the flax was ripening early. So there's a consistency, I suppose, both in Egyptian agriculture, according to the Torah, and land of Israel agriculture, that barley is one of the first things to get sturdy enough to produce, but that also makes it sturdy enough to be ruinable. Norman?
We are all sufficiently urbanized that most of us probably cannot at a glance distinguish between these four species when they're growing. But in ancient Egypt and Israel and Mesopotamia, and later in France, Germany, and Spain, probably there were almost no adult Jews who did not see fields of grains growing on a more or less regular basis. And so they all knew. Of course, there's this period of time when the barley and the spelt have already, the barley and the flax have already ripened and we're harvesting them, but the wheat and its close relative spelt have not yet become ready to harvest. And so the idea that this happens is probably just second nature to them. Rashi barely comments on that fact.
Yeah.
Because everybody knows it.
I can't believe I'm missing a Scotland reference, but what is it?
We wouldn't have whiskey.
Oh, I see. Meaning, had all the grain been damaged?
Oh, the barley been destroyed. We'd all be drinking bourbon.
That would have been a terrible plague. That's not, so go ahead, Dan. Can someone see if you can raise the volume over there a little bit? I'm having a hard time hearing it when Diane speaks. Ilan, can you just press volume up on the computer? Go ahead, Diane.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we first got to Israel, there were still a lot in the southeast corner around Talpiot. There were still a lot of empty fields. And in the spring, the wheat, the oats, and the barley would grow. They were weeds, basically.
Volunteer.
Volunteer. And I remember looking up to try and distinguish which was which, but they were all over the place.
Yeah, I think I sort of remember that part of Talpiot as well. And you could still be an urbanite and still kind of trace the seasons a little bit just by looking out your window. Okay, let's start Rashi, right? This is the beginning of the end of Rashi on Parshat Ve'era. Carol, do you want to work through it?
Ki afilot hena.
No, go up to verse 31. Oh. Because we read verses 31 and 32 together, but we're going to now go back to Rashi on 31. The Dibor Marchil is V'hapishta v'asara nukata.
Nishpara.
Okay, period. So the first thing Rashi does is translate. If you're having a hard time, reader, figuring out what nukata is, before I even get to the root, let me tell you what it means. And according to Rashi, what does nukata mean? Broken. Like he turns it into a more common verb, right? It's hard to figure out what the shoresh of nukata is. Let's put it into a more common verb. Shin bet reish, break. It means broken. So the flax and the barley, which again we've already discussed this, it means that they were damaged. Okay, now he gets into the etymologies.
Actually, didn't look at this one. Maybe you should do this one. I was looking at the second one.
Okay. You want to give it a shot?
I'll try.
Well, it's not a test. We'll help you through it.
Okay. Paro nikah.
So there's a word. Do you have a word before pharaoh?
No.
Aha.
Lashon.
Okay. So lashon. When Rashi uses the word lashon, he means this this is similar to the meaning of, the language of, quote, Paro Necho. Okay, so we're going to do a lot of screen sharing today because there are a lot of verses that he's going to be bringing us to. So, okay, I know that's a little bit hard to see from here. This is the second book of Kings, chapter 23, verse 30. Okay? Biyamav, in his day, Allah Pharaoh Necho Melech Mitzrayim. Look how it's translated here by the JPS. Necho in this translation, and I am not a scholar of the second book of Kings, so I'm not weighing in as to whether or not this translation is right, but clearly this translation is reading it differently than Rashi, translates the Hebrew word Necho as a proper name. His name, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. Al-Melech Ashur, I mean, the context is not relevant to our story. This is a moment where the book of Kings is remembering when one foreign king decided to attack another foreign king. So the Egyptian king rose up against the Ashurian king in Iraq on the Har Prat, right on the Euphrates, Vayelech HaMelech Yoshiyahu, and the Israelite king Yoshia went Likrato to meet him, Vayimitehu, and he the Bigo Kirototo, and he was killed in this encounter. Okay, we can study the book of Kings another time. What's interesting is that Rashi is bringing this. If we just read this translation, JPS, we'd have no idea why he's bringing it. But Rashi is bringing it to tell us that he thinks the word Necho is describing this Pharaoh, and describing this Pharaoh as a what? Lame. As lame. Right? That Bayamav Allah Pharaoh Necho Melech Mitzrayim, the lame, not as an insult, but as a description. The lame Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt at the time, he is the one who came out against the Assyrian king. Now, I did not do a deep dive on this verse. I don't know to what extent Rashi's understanding of this verse as Necho being a description of him as opposed to it being a name is accepted or is accurate, but it's clear that Rashi is assuming that we're just going to accept that. Let's give Tova the microphone.
Just want to say that the Pharaoh Necho is historically attested multiple times. It's Necho.
Rashi did not have a master's in history. Norm?
If Pharaoh portrays himself as the perfect human being and being a god himself, then describing him as lame strongly contradicts that and is a great insult to Pharaoh.
Right, which might be enjoyable for an Israelite writer to do, right? To kind of give a dig. Okay, but the next one, okay, so that's the first one he brings, perhaps, or certainly ahistorical, and then what's the next word you have in your translation, in your Rashi?
Nechaim.
Nechaim. It's just amazing. Rashi can just put a Hebrew word and assume that his reader, who does not have an annotated version, knows what he's referring to. It's a single Hebrew word. It happens to be from the 16th chapter of Isaiah, verse 7, and I suppose Rashi just assumes, we've discussed this many times, that anyone who's going to be reading him will just get the reference because they know it by heart. I wouldn't get the reference. Look at the screen. This is Isaiah 16. Lachein yiyelil Moav. Let Moav across the Jordan River howl, right? Yelel. Lemoav kulo yelel. May all of them howl or scream. La'ashishei kir chareshet. Tehegu, ach nechain, very hard Hebrew. Ashish is a flat cake of raisins, and kir chareshet must be a place. Regarding the delights of the raisin cakes of this place, you will moan, you will groan, ach nechaim. So ach nechaim is kind of being used here adverbially to describe the type of moaning you're going to do. It's translated here by JPS as most pitifully, meaning injured, broken, less or hurt. So Rashi says here are two usages of the root. One of them, Tova has convinced us, it's a proper name, where it's clear that the nun is part of it. However you understand this verse in Isaiah, Nechaim, there's no way to understand that as like a rendering of hika, of being hit. It's just meaning nechet, meaning to be handicapped or diminished. V'chein, keep going.
V'chein lo nuchu. Is that right?
Right. So as Rashi, am describing our verse, that's why we read the two verses together, that nukata means we're damaged from the word necha. Also, in the next verse, lo nuku, it's going to mean the same thing. Okay, we're going to pause there because I see Rick's hand up, and let's see if you have any you want to add on this, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My Silverman here in the footnotes, it has 2 Samuel 9:3 also. In between the King's citation and Isaiah, it says CF.
Cross-reference.
2 Samuel 9:3. So
it's saying that Rashi said that, or it's just adding that in as an annotation.
Well, I don't see it in the Hebrew, but it's there in the English, so I thought we could look at it. I don't know.
What's the citation? 2 Samuel
9:3.
Let's see.
Chapter 9, verse 3.
It's probably the editor saying there was yet another verse he could have shared. It's like,
but if it's another example of that,
I could do Rashi better than Rashi. Here's the verse. Vayomer Hamelech, the king said, I don't remember the context offhand. Ha'efes od ish lebeit Shaul, is there anyone left in Saul's house? Ve'eseh imo chesed Elohim, and I will kind of keep faith with him in the faith of God. Vayomer Tziva responded El Hamelech to the king, Od bein Leonatan neche raglayim. Yes, there is still one of Jonathan's son who is neche raglayim, which is how neche is used in modern Hebrew. Injured, handicapped, right? Needing help. So I don't know if the version you're looking at, Rick, is saying that there's actually a version of Rashi that includes that, and Rashi actually brought that verse, or if the editor's saying here is another verse that Rashi could have used. Okay. Back to Rashi. V'lo yitachen.
V'lo yitachen Lefarsho, lashon haka'a.
Okay, so translate that.
It is not correct to interpret it in the language of, is that hitting? I don't know what that is.
Hitting, right? So when we saw nuku and nukata, we were thinking, is this a root that begins with a nun? Or is this a root that begins with a hey, where the nun comes in the passive, right? I have 1,000 examples and none are coming to mind. My God. So in the passive, like in the nifal, the nun gets added to the structure of the word. And so you could have made the argument that this was from haka'ah, particularly because we're dealing with makot, right, of plagues, of smitings. And the meaning would have worked. And he says, grammatically, etymologically, it does not make sense to read this as haka'ah. He's going to get a little technical now. Why?
She'ein nun bimkom hey lefarosh nukata kamo hukata nuku kamo Huku. It sounds silly, right?
He's basically saying, why can't we read this as lahakot with the root being hey, kaf, hey, and the nun is coming in the passive? It's just not the way it works, he says. The nun doesn't replace the hey such that you could read nukata as hukata or nuku as huku. I think what he's saying is that when you put a 3-letter root that begins with hey in the passive, you put it in the pu'al, not the nifal. Now, if you studied Hebrew grammar, that makes sense. If you didn't, it sounds like I'm speaking gibberish. There are several ways of doing passive in Hebrew. One of them is the nifal. Lishbor, to break. Lehishaver, to be broken. So it's the thing I broke, ani shover, the thing was broken, nishbar. Another way of putting something into the passive is the pu'al, right? So lidaber, or daber is speech, midaber is speak, midubar is spoken. Midubar is in the pu'al, not the nifal. There's no nun there. And in some forms of the pu'al, there's a mem. In the past tense of the pu'al, there's no mem. It's a more concise word. It's just vowels of the root. I'm trying to think of an example, but it's not coming to me.
Is it like the difference between transitive and intransitive?
No, it's just two different ways of doing passive. Two different ways of doing passive voice in Hebrew. And basically what Rashi's saying is, when you have a three-letter root that begins with hey, and you want to put it into passive, you don't put it in the nifal, you put it in the pu'al, and it becomes a sounding verb where the first letter is a hey, not a nun. So he's just stating that by fiat, okay? And he happens to be correct grammatically. Diane Larry, we'll pause on the translation.
So Lashon Medubar is spoken Hebrew. So in English, maybe it's rendered more like an adjective.
Yes, I mean, we Hebrew uses more verb forms than English does, and uses verb forms adjectively and adverbially. Correct.
We're doing
Hold
that.
on, you need to speak in the microphone. Sorry.
Right, we've done that too. I mean, we're using speak as spoken and turned it into an adjective. So it's
Yeah.
Could one that we can't use here be they have broken, and the one we're using here is they are broken? Because they're very different. They are broken means that they're the ones that are broken. They have broken means they broke something else.
Yeah, there are subtle differences. I'm thinking about, I don't know why this is the example coming in my mind, the verb likbor, to bury. When you go to a grave, you see, we saw this in Split, right? At the top of the grave in Hebrew, you see the letters po, pe nun. Pe nun stands for po nikbar. Here is buried, okay? But you also have the word kubar in the pu'al, which means was buried. And there's a subtle distinction for a root that can appear both in nifal and in pu'al. There's a subtle distinction that's hard to explain in English as to what the difference is between those two passives, right? The store is closing at 7. Is hachanut nizgeret b'sh'a sheva, nifal. It's going to be closed. But you can also say chanut sigura is closed, which is pu'al. So both passives can be used in Hebrew, but Rashi is saying that the nifal one, the one that adds a nun, is never used if the first letter is a hey. Okay? Nitty gritty, pikayun, but he's trying to explain why this is neche, not haka'a. Okay, keep going, Carol. I think we're at Ella.
Ella hanun shoresh beteva.
Which means?
The nun is part of the root of the word.
The nun is part of the root. It's part of the shoresh, right? Beharei.
Beharei hu migzeret.
Migizrat. Rashi used the word gizra to refer to actually what we might use as the word shoresh, right? It's from the same root as the same. Gizra is literally decree, but it's like a slice. It's the same slice of language as the following verse, and the following verse is from Eov. I will pull that up as well. So Eov, Job, a very hard and interesting text, both in terms of like what we're supposed to draw from it and the language. And this is from Eov. What is the reference? Chapter 33, verse 21. It's in front of you. Very hard Hebrew. Yichel bisaro meroi. Bisaro, his flesh. Yichel, wastes away. Me roi, from being able to be seen. A description of tremendous deprivation and suffering. Veshupu atzmotav. His bones are rubbed away. Lashuf means to rub. So shufu very short, compact word. It's the past tense, third person, plural of a pu'al verb, and it doesn't say nishpu, which would have been nifal, but pu'al, shupu, lo ru'u, and they're not visible. Okay, so he says you might think nuku is is hard to understand what it means. It's the same as shupu, where the shin, obviously in shupu, the shin is part of the root. No one would make the argument that the shin is part of the structure. It's just the root shafeh, to rub away. Shupu. God, I'm just aware of how silly some of these sounds sound. Shupu, rubbed away. Nuku, smitten or actually damaged, not smitten, not from the root meaning smitten. Okay. All right. That was a lot. Any comments on that before he gives an even longer conversation on the next verse? No? We're about to get to the barley and the emmer. Okay, let's move. Sue, you want the next one? Ki hasora aviv?
Yeah. I just got to pull my.
By the way, a reminder that next week is Yontif, so no class. 2 weeks from today, right? Next week is Yontif, second day Yontif? Yep. Yeah. 2 weeks from today is the first day after Pesach, class. Okay. So we will have class in 2 weeks, but a week from today we'll just come and daven together. Okay.
Okay. Ki hasora aviv. Kfar bikra ve'omedet bekasheha.
Okay, translate those 4 words and see if you can make sense of the second word there based on something that we already referred to in class today. Just giving you a hint as to how to understand that second word. It already what?
Well, did we use that? We use that word in another spot?
We use that root.
Okay, I don't know.
The nickname for Shavuot is Chag
Bikurim.
That's Pesach. Chag HaBikurim, the holiday of the first fruits. By the word, Bikurim is the same Hebrew word as the root that we're going to be talking about on Monday, Ta'anit Bechorot, the fast of the firstborn. Bet Kaf Resh means first in primogeniture, right? Whether a human or a donkey or a plant. It's formed with different vowels in different ways, but livaker, not with a kuf, which means to visit, but with a kaf, means to place something first, right? To put something at the front of the line. So kfar bikra means that the barley already first fruited,
right?
Already was on the way of being a first. It already showed itself to be in the front of the line of the agriculture that was going to ripen, right? And yeah,
better, and it's already standing as straw. It's already standing in its straw. That's this is totally, clear.
Correct. And what I don't know, I really don't know, when Rashi says bekasheha, is this an intentional or unintentional double entendre? Already standing in its straw, kash, or its hardness, kasheha, its sturdiness, because kashet means hard. Now, I think we actually looked at this once before. I also don't know if the etymology of the Hebrew word kash, which means straw, is actually related to the Hebrew word kasheh. But because the argument that's being made here is that it was strong enough not to withstand the hail, but strong enough to be damaged, it's an interesting use of the word, because it's also saying that it was in stalks, but stalks are stiff. Rosemary, hand up, microphone. We need a second microphone next time.
When we cut the wheat or barley, they should be yellow, and they become straw, and the straw is very easy to break it. It's dry already.
Yeah.
So that's why they are already yellow.
Fragile, right.
But the wheat, we don't have it yellow. They are still green.
Right.
That's the
developed enough in its season that is now vulnerable and fragile. Rick, I see your hand up. Are you hand up again or still?
No, my Silverman has Bekashya with a mapik in the hay, so it's their, the feminine possession, right? It's their Bekashia, they're standing, or it. I got the vowels differently than the way you were reading it.
Correct. Mine has Bekasheha, which would mean, really? I think it's their straw. But Bekashia,
yeah,
more sounds like its sturdiness, its strength. So even, I guess there's even a machloket on. I didn't bring my Torah. Anyone have a Torah Chaim? You have the Torah Chaim on the word. How does the word appear, Carol, in the Rashi? The omedet be. What's the actual word? But what's the? Is there a? What are the letters? Oh, it's the same letters. Bekashia. Bekasho. Yeah, so this one has bekasheha. So there's a machloket. Is it bekasheha or bekashia? It doesn't matter that much, but it's fascinating. It can be read two different ways. Okay, we don't have a Rashi on the Rashi, although maybe the Rashis and the Rashi say something. Okay, keep going, Sue.
They lost it. Hold on.
They've already first fruited. They're in their straw or their strength.
Venishtabru v'naflu.
What does that mean?
They broke and they fell.
They broke and they fell because they were strong enough to be broken and fall, as opposed to soft grass, which generally you can trample on and nothing happens to it. Okay. V'chein
apishta gadla kvar. So the flax already grew. And
Rashi's use of that word vehuksha makes me think that the word above was bekasheha, its hardness, not in its straw. Because here, when he says huksha, he's clearly meaning the verb form of the word kasheh, meaning strong. He's not saying huksha and it got strawified. He's saying it already had grown and become strong. Huksha. Okay?
I think they're related. I think the words are.
You think the word kash for straw? Could be. I don't remember that etymology. It would be worth looking at. Okay.
Ve'haseora, no, ve'huksha lamod big vuleha, and big vuleha. I don't know what the
strong enough to stand with its buds. Meaning, if you add nature's amazing. If you add a bud to a still flimsy stalk, it's just going to topple over, right? Because buds have weight, right? So if it's already strong and straight, then the buds can grow and add mass to the tops of the stalks without it drooping. So it already hardened and therefore could stand erect even with the buds beginning to bloom, okay? So that's Rashi's take on the Se'ora Aviv. Okay, that's what he understands that to mean. Keep going. Now he's going to go a deep dive into the word Aviv.
Asura Aviv. Amda
be'ibeha. Amda be'ibeha. Okay, so it stood in its aleph bet, in its eb, in its ib, whatever that word means. Let's look at the videotape. Let's see if we can figure out what that root might mean. I'm going to show you two things. First, Jastro, and the reason I'm using Jastro here, not BDB, is because Rashi, he's toiling in biblical Hebrew, but he's explaining the verse in more rabbinic Hebrew, right? So if he's going to use in the vernacular be'ibeha, in its ib, it's got to be that there's some rabbinic Hebrew word that makes sense in. So look at the screen. So look what the root aleph bet means. An ev, or an abe, on the left side of the screen here, means a swelling or a spreading. Definition 1, the young shoots of a tree. Definition 2, state of growth or development. So when Rashi says this sentence, he's just using it as a vocabulary word. That why is it called Aviv? I lost my place. She'amda be'ida. It stood in its young growth. It was able to withstand its young growth. And then he gives us a biblical reference. Go ahead, Sue.
Lashon be'ibei anachal, agachal, what does that say? Anachal.
Anachal.
Ibei anachal.
This is from the language. Yeah, this is from the language of the Ibei Hanachal. Look at the screen. Shir HaShirim, which we'll read next week, chapter 6, verse 11. El ginat egoz yaradti. I descended to the garden of nuts. Lirot, to view. Be'ibei Hanachal. The first budding of that valley, the first sprouting. Lirot haparcha hagefen, to see if the vines had blossomed. Obviously, double entendres all over the place in Shir HaShirim. Heinitzu haribonim, to see if the rounded pomegranates were in bloom. Understand it however you wish to understand it. But here in Ibei Hanacha means whether or not there was an early sprouting in the valley. So biblical Hebrew, Aleph Bet, doesn't refer to alphabet, but an early sprouting. And according to Rashi, that becomes the word Aviv, which makes sense in our verse that the barley was already early sprouting, already producing. And that's why it's called Aviv. And it all makes sense. And it's all happening, as Rosemary said before, in the season of Aviv, the holiday of Aviv. That's Rashi's comment on verse 31. Yes, Sue? And then Larry, Diane?
How do we leave Nachal river? Isn't Nachal always river, or does it mean valley?
Well, yes, Nachal is river, but really what Nachal is the valley created by the river. Right, so I think technically the word Nachal doesn't refer to the water, but the topographical V created by the water. Even though we think of it colloquial as Nachal Sorek is the river of Sorek, it's really the valley created by the river Sorek. Yeah. All right, Larry, you get the last comment, assuming that's you or Diane.
So even though I sometimes complain that Rashi doesn't really know what he's talking about, in this case, he probably did, because it's commonly assumed that Rashi was a vintner, although I know there's some controversy about that, but I think that he may well have been. The criticism that grapes weren't grown in the area that he was living in isn't true, but he certainly knew something about barley and flax, since they are grown in France, and France today is the largest producer of flax of any European country. So he probably knew something about the growing patterns and about how they grew and what they looked like, and how they might be damaged by rain or hail.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Good place to end. Okay, 2 weeks from today, let's do a siyum, because there's a really good chance we're going to finish Parshat Va'era. So, as usual, bring a l'chaim if you want, bring some treats, bring some snacks, and go back into your notes. And if anybody wants to offer a short retrospective Dvar Torah on Parshat Va'era, who's keeping track? Larry, are you the one who keeps track of when we started this? Someone keeps track of when we started Va'era. I forgot.
I probably have it. If I go back in my notes and I'll check.
Okay. We've been averaging about 18 months a parsha. I don't know if this one was longer or shorter. It seems like we've been doing it for a long time. But let's do a siyum 2 weeks from today. It's going to take a while to get through the last Rashis. But I think we can get through without rushing it and celebrate, and I'll bring the text for the siyum, and then we'll start Parshat Bo. And and this is our time of the year where our holidays are matching where we are in the Torah reading.
I have dates. I'm going to tell you dates.
You have dates, Sue?
I have dates so Va'era, we started Va'era. If I have, I'll have the basic. Wait, Va'era. We are looking I've got the first date that I have noted on Va'era, because I missed something, was August 17th of 22.
So almost 2 years. Yeah, it's a long parsha. Yeah. Norm?
I was going to say, I remember when I had to take a year off starting in July of 2022, I thought, oh, good, because I've never liked the plagues very much. And this way, in a year from now, they'll be finished with the plagues, but a year from now, we were just starting them.
Have a good day, everyone. Early Shabbat Shalom. Chag Kasher V'Sameach. See y'all soon.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.